Having done some research, it turns out Fowey is a very interesting place, and I wish we could have spent more time exploring. In particular, it has a long association with literature and writers such as Daphne du Maurier and Kenneth Grahame, who was most famous for The Wind in the Willows. It's widely accepted Fowey Hall was the inspiration for Toad Hall. Fowey Hall was built by a local man, Charles Hanson, in 1889 upon his return from Canada, having made his fortune in lumber. He later became the MP for Bodmin, Lord Mayor of London, and a baronet. Fowey Hall welcomed guests from all over the world. Rather than local boy made good, he seems to have garnered a reputation for lording it over his fellow Cornish folk, and some say he was the inspiration for Toad in The Wind in the Willows. Fowey is a very old settlement and was once a lot more prominent than it is today. Prior to the Reform Act of 1832, it was represented by 2 members of Parliament and was what is referred to as a rotten borough, a constituency that was grossly overrepresented in national government and with such a small voting population that was easily rigged. In other areas, in particular the densely populated industrial cities of the north, there was little or no representation. The Reform Act also massively increased those eligible to vote. Prior to the Act, only very wealthy landowners could vote. The Act broadened this to include small landowners, tenant farmers, shopkeepers and all householders who paid a yearly rental of £10 or more, and even some lodgers. How kind of them. The Act wasn't all good because it formally excluded women from voting, something that previously was rare, but if they met all the other strict criteria wasn't specifically unlawful. Women eventually got limited voting rights in 1918, and in 1928 got equal voting rights. We rightly celebrate this, but it's interesting to note that the majority of men also had to wait until 1918 before they could vote.
Once we crossed the ferry, we were straight into climbing up the hillside on the familiar single-track Cornish lanes. Not only are they very narrow, but there is often treacherous loose gravel down the centre. We tried to avoid this, but when the lane is already so narrow, the alternative is getting close to the walled or banked sides. You may notice we got a bit too close at one point and scraped our pannier. Better that than ourselves or another vehicle though. We head across the small peninsula opposite Fowey and stop in the car park at the top of the village of Polperro. In hindsight, maybe we should have carried on down to the quayside, as it looks like another interesting and beautiful Cornish harbour. But with all the ins and outs and ups and downs to get to the Cornish harbours, we can't do them all.
Oh yeah, we're straight into challenging stuff though, aren't we?
We hit the wall at one point, but I'm not quite sure what that was all about.
If you've been following this adventure, you will know that we are trying to ride the coastline of Great Britain. It's not that easy. Often there's no coast road and we spend as much time riding inland on some very narrow lanes. High hedgerows are very common on such lanes, especially in the counties of Cornwall and Devon. It's not so much the hedgerow is high, but the road is often well below the level of the fields either side. Apart from the modern road surface, these lanes are as they would have been hundreds of years ago when people travelled along the ancient byways between the fields. Over the years, the lane sunk lower, which also allowed it to help drain the adjacent fields. Many such lanes never progress to becoming roads, but are still rights of way that can be used for walking, horse riding and, in some instances, driving. The ones that can be driven are known as green lanes, and are pretty much the only tracks where vehicles can venture off-road. We do a bit ourselves even on this big machine. Like, subscribe and click the bell so you can follow our adventures.
According to some, Polperro is one of the best villages in Cornwall, famous for its ancient fishermen's cottages, the picturesque village with the River Pol winding through it, and the fishing harbour. The first known record of Polperro as a fishing village dates from 1303. For hundreds of years, pilchard was fished and preserved in the village before being distributed around Cornwall. When the pilchard fishery waned, smuggling became a major source of Polperro's riches. Polperro's harbour is actually privately owned by the council tax payers of the village. Much of the buildings near the harbour are unchanged, and with the narrowed streets, Polperro retains an old world charm that is second to none. Vehicles are not permitted to park in Polperro, and a large car park is provided at the entrance. We conveniently missed the sign and wondered why we drew a few looks. Oh well. Looe is beautiful, with the tide in or out, but when tides are high, the low-lying parts suffer from flooding. In fact, Looe is known as the UK's most flooded town, and there have been various flood defence plans over the years. There continues to be consultation sessions for locals, but the aim is for final plans to be published by March 2023. For this reason, most of the old fishermen's houses were built with their living quarters upstairs, while the ground floor area was used for storing tools, fishing tackle, and even boats. These are known as fishermen's cellars, and this style is found all over the south coast. During the Victorian era, Looe thrived as one of Cornwall's largest ports, exporting tin, arsenic and granite, in addition to its fishing and boat building industries. And of course, with the Victorians' passion for seaside holidays, Looe became and still is a much sought after tourist destination. As you can see, driving through and parking in Looe is permissible, which renders it easily accessed.
Looe Island, also known as St George's Island and historically St Michael's Island, is a small island nature reserve a mile from the mainland. According to a local legend, Joseph of Arimathea landed here with the Christ child. The island is now owned and managed by the Cornwall Wildlife Trust charity, where access is carefully managed for the benefit of wildlife and landing is only possible via the Cornwall Wildlife Trust authorised boatman.
Looe originally developed as two separate towns, East and West Looe, divided by the River Looe but connected by a bridge. In 1411 this was wooden, but was replaced by a stone bridge in 1436 after it was burnt down. The stone bridge was quite elaborate, with a chapel in the centre of it. Today a 7-arched Victorian bridge takes us across the River Looe. Although there was much local protest, the two sides of Looe became one town in 1898.
Looe, like Fowey that I spoke about earlier, was another rotten borough. Prior to the Reform Act, it also had 2 MPs, one for either side of the river. Tregantle Fort is one of several forts built in the 1860s surrounding Plymouth that were built to deter the French from attacking naval bases on the Channel coast. It could accommodate 35 large guns and 2,000 men, but these were never needed, and it had fewer smaller guns and often only a handful of troops stationed there. In fact, it was vacated after World War I, but was pressed back into action in the Second World War for military training and to accommodate American soldiers in the lead-up to the D-Day landings. It is still used today by the armed forces for training, in particular firing practice. The red flags are flown to warn the public when firing is taking place.
The B3247 was the spectacular road we took to get to the fort. But at the fort there's another road that takes its place on the edge of the cliffs, overlooking the sea, simply called the Military Road. If this day wasn't already amazing, it just got even better with these fantastic views. Apart from following the coast as close as we can, we have no plans, but if something comes along, then we like to explore a bit. One such place is Rame Head. There's a lookout station here managed by volunteers. In 1994, the Coast Guard stopped manually observing shipping because they believed technology negated the need. Others disagreed, and the National Coast Watch was formed and took over the task. From a long line of these coastal stations, they monitor the shipping in the channel as it sails by and are ready to raise the alarm if any vessel gets into trouble. We had a very interesting chat with the volunteers, mainly retired seafarers. They proudly informed us of several times when the technology had failed and how, if it wasn't for their presence, disaster would have struck.
On the left is Cawsand Fort. It appears to date from the same time as Tregantle Fort that we saw earlier, and it overlooks Plymouth Sound. As you can see, it has been converted into homes. Not much chance of these collapsing.
There was so much to see and enjoy this day, we've had to split it into 2 episodes. As we make our way down to the Torpoint ferry and cross the River Tamar to Plymouth, we will end this episode. Make sure you join us next time for the second half of this day, and if you're enjoying our videos and want to keep up with our adventures, please like, subscribe and ring that bell.